The fallout from the 2026 World Cup did not end with those referee confessions. Nor did it stop with FIFA opening Argentina's case, Messi retiring from international play, or the legal battles surrounding Infantino. Instead, the consequences of this 2026 tournament keep dropping with the rapid speed that global bodies unleash when they have both the power and precedent to strike. And the spark this time is not one of the controversial moments documented for weeks. It is not the refereeing. It is not favoritism. Nor is it the backroom instructions inside the VAR booth. This is something entirely different. Something that occurred during the semifinals, slipping almost completely unnoticed beneath the deafening noise of the biggest media scandals. The exact moment when several players from the Argentine national team unfurled a banner right after the final whistle against England, a banner making a heavy political statement. The Falkland Islands, a territory disputed between Argentina and the United Kingdom since the War of 1982. It is the single most deeply rooted symbol in the Argentine identity, and simultaneously the most explosive political issue between Argentina and the United Kingdom. This tension extends to European Union countries that took a stand during that historical South Atlantic conflict. Yet, that banner was displayed in a World Cup stadium following a semi-final, with global broadcast cameras capturing every single detail on the pitch right at the final whistle. It was a one-day story, buried under the massive tsunami of refereeing scandals that the tournament manufactured week after week. But today it brings the most definitive and damaging institutional consequences for the players involved. FIFA and UEFA launched a coordinated strike through the alliance between Infantino and Ceferin, an alliance that, amidst this World Cup scandal, carries the thick irony of organizations punishing players for political behavior, while they themselves are investigated for the most political actions in modern sports history, leaving 4 key players suspended. Enzo Fernández, Alexis Mac Allister, Emiliano Martínez, Cristian Romero, banned from the 2026-2027 Champions League season and slapped with a massive €200,000 fine each over that Falklands banner. Make sure to stick around because what we are revealing today is the absolute most comprehensive breakdown of the heaviest, most politically explosive punishment any international governing body has ever handed down to a squad of players, or any national team in the history of the world's most popular sport. By the end of this, everything will make complete sense. Let us look at the facts, because the details here are so specific and carry such massive sporting, financial, and political fallout for the 4 suspended players and the 4 clubs that currently hold their contracts, that we must unpack them one by one with absolute precision. Let us start with the exact incident that sparked the BANS the Falklands banner during the semifinal. To really understand this punishment, we first have to examine what that gesture actually represents within international soccer, and why the governing bodies chose to classify it in such a severe way. The disciplinary codes of both FIFA and UEFA contain a very specific clause that strictly outlaws any political demonstrations, religious messages, or other non-sporting displays at any official events hosted by these 2 powerful organizations. This strict rule has existed for decades, serving as the essential tool that any global sporting body needs to host major tournaments in nations with highly sensitive political systems, conflicting national identities, and deep historical disputes that are often entirely incompatible with one another. Soccer must be allowed to reach every single nation on Earth, and to achieve that, the pitch cannot become a battleground for the political grievances of any individual country. That is the exact logic this specific regulation is designed to protect. Under that reasoning, the Falklands banner unfurled by the Argentine players, after knocking England out of the World Cup semifinals, is exactly the kind of forbidden political statement. It carries massive diplomatic sensitivity, occurring in a match with the largest global audience imaginable, right at its emotional peak, the final whistle of a victory over the nation Argentina fought a painful war against in its recent history. This single incident combined all the critical elements that international soccer organizations view as the most serious violation of the rules against political messaging, and the harsh punishment handed down by these governing bodies matches the extreme severity that such a combination of violations triggers in the rulebook. This is just the beginning of what I have to tell you. But before we look at the actual details of the penalty, we really have to stop and understand what that banner incident in the semifinals actually meant in the context of the exact moment it happened, because that specific context is what gives this punishment an emotional and political weight that goes way beyond the technical application of a simple disciplinary rulebook. Argentina had just knocked out England, easily the most historically charged match in the entire tournament, and not just this tournament, It is probably one of the biggest in international soccer history, especially when you consider the political tension and national identity on the line when they meet. The War of 1982, the Falklands, and the Hand of God goal. Maradona, 40 years of intense history between two nations that use the soccer field to process something that goes way beyond sport. It is something no rulebook can ever erase from the hearts of the fans on either side, though rules can definitely control how it is shown on the field. In that exact context, those Argentine players displaying that Falklands banner were not making some calculated decision about the legal consequences of their action. Instead, they were reacting with the raw, emotional intensity of the final whistle of a game that means everything to their countries, just as history dictates, representing something in their national identity that holds a very deep, powerful meaning, that no governing body in international soccer can ever expect them to completely silence. Of course, that does not excuse the gesture under the current rules. It simply cannot, because if rules are not enforced during the most politically charged game of the tournament, with the deepest history of conflict, then they might as well never be applied. But it does explain why the penalty, even if technically correct under the rules, triggered a massive wave of anger across Argentine soccer and among those who understand the situation, a feeling of pure injustice that Messi captured so perfectly with all the authority his name carries. But before examining the sporting consequences for those four clubs, we must understand the highly unusual coordination between FIFA under Infantino and UEFA under Ceferin that this penalty brought about, because that kind of direct coordination is pretty rare in the history of relations between these two organizations. FIFA and UEFA are distinct organizations with different, though somewhat related, jurisdictions. FIFA runs global soccer, international team tournaments, and the World Cup. UEFA, on the other hand, oversees European soccer, the Champions League, the Europa League, and all European national team tournaments. Normally, punishments handed down by FIFA during their own events do not automatically carry over to any of the matches that UEFA organizes. They actually require a very specific coordination process between both bodies, which has historically caused incredibly difficult situations whenever the two organizations were not fully aligned. In this specific case, according to information confirmed by sources closest to the whole process, Infantino personally pushed the file over to UEFA with the desperate urgency of a leader wanting immediate and highly visible consequences. And Ceferin gave his quick approval with the speed of an executive who, amid a massive World Cup scandal, desperately needs to prove that both governing bodies can act swiftly and decisively in enforcing regulations, even while their own internal reform process is still going on. This sudden coordination, this alliance between Infantino and Ceferin to push through a punishment crossing normal jurisdictional boundaries, holds an irony that is simply impossible to ignore, especially since these are the exact same two bodies, those very same two figures, whom the 2026 World Cup scandal, linked to that refereeing favoritism that officials openly confessed to, now acting with a speed and force they never showed when a system of corrupt instructions favoring Argentina was operating for weeks, punishing a political gesture by Argentine players with a harsh level of severity that they failed to show when active pressure was placed on officials to favor those exact same players. The irony is absolutely perfect and must be pointed out, even if the punishment over that banner is legally correct on paper. But do you want to know the most unbelievable part of this entire situation? What comes next? Before we look at how Messi reacted, we must understand what a fine of €200,000 per player really means in the economic landscape of modern soccer. €200,000 per player. For 4 players, that is €800,000 in total. In elite soccer, that amount is roughly equal to just 10 days of salary for a player like Enzo Fernández or Mac Allister. From a purely financial standpoint, the fine is definitely not the most damaging part of the penalty. But the single most devastating blow, the one that will have real, undeniable consequences on the competitive dreams of these 4 penalized clubs, is their complete ban from the Champions League. See, the Champions League is not just some ordinary tournament. It is the absolute biggest showcase in global club soccer, the grand stage where the most massive sponsorship deals are negotiated, where each club's television broadcast rights fetch the highest prices, where elite superstars showcase the world-class talent that justifies their astronomical salaries, and where Europe's most ambitious clubs desperately want to have their absolute best players on the pitch for every single match. Stripping Chelsea of Enzo Fernández for this entire competition does not just cost them the crucial points they could have won with him controlling the midfield. It cost them the massive media spotlight of not having the most expensive signing in club history on the pitch for the biggest tournament of the year. It destroys the entire narrative of a grand club project built specifically on acquiring the absolute best talent on earth. And now, with four of the world's most elite players simultaneously sidelined from the same tournament for the exact same reason, they are forced to rebuild that narrative with extreme urgency. That is a devastating cost that no sporting governing body could ever hope to quantify in some sterile press release announcing the suspension. The sporting fallout of this penalty for the four affected clubs is easily the most devastating blow that any coordinated set of sanctions has ever inflicted upon English teams in the long history of the Champions League. Chelsea is losing Enzo Fernández, the midfield engine who, during the World Cup, was the single most influential player for that Argentinian squad until his dramatic red card in the final. He is the star player the Chelsea board signed for the most expensive transfer fee in history for his position. He was destined to be the absolute anchor of this entire London project in Europe's premier club competition next season. Without Enzo on the pitch, Chelsea enters the Champions League with a massive void in midfield, a deficit. Their sporting directors have absolutely neither the time nor the financial resources to fix in the few remaining weeks of the transfer window. Then, Liverpool loses Alexis Mac Allister, the Scottish descent midfielder with Argentinian roots who, under Arne Slot at Liverpool, had finally found the perfect role and system to showcase his lethal combination of late box runs, tenacious defensive recovery, and brilliant playmaking vision. Stripped of Mac Allister, Liverpool enters the Champions League with the most severely limited midfield they have fielded in any of their highly competitive European campaigns in recent memory. Aston Villa is forced to lose Dibu Martinez, the phenomenal shot stopper who was easily the World Cup's most clutch goalkeeper during Argentina's most high-stakes and nerve-wracking moments, the man who built a legendary reputation at Aston Villa as a goalkeeper capable of single-handedly winning matches on the most demanding Champions League nights. Without Dibu in goal, Aston Villa loses the crucial security blanket in soccer's most unforgiving position, the exact kind of backline confidence that clubs without recent European pedigree desperately need to battle the continent's heavyweights. And Tottenham is losing superstar Cristian Romero, the elite center-back who has proven both in the World Cup and at Tottenham to be the most complete and physically imposing defender in the entire Premier League, dominating the air and commanding the backline. Without Romero leading them, Tottenham enters the Champions League with a backline that, in Europe's most high-pressure matches, will completely lack the vocal leadership and physical authority that the Argentine defender brings to every single game he plays. Four massive absences across four different clubs, triggered by the exact same penalty in the exact same week, all tracing back to the same controversial incident during that single World Cup semi-final match. The 2026-27 Champions League features four English teams that must kick off the biggest tournament of the year, missing their absolute most vital players in their key positions. And that is going to have massive consequences on the competitive balance of the entire tournament, a reality organizers cannot possibly ignore once the initial round results start rolling in. Messi's reaction to this crushing sanction arrived with the immediate speed and fierce intensity that the most influential captain in the history of the Argentine national team always unleashes when he believes a governing body's ruling is so fundamentally flawed that the perceived injustice absolutely demands a public response. Granted, Messi has retired from the national team. He confirmed his departure from the Albiceleste in the bitter weeks following the World Cup final, walking away in the most painful, politically toxic atmosphere any footballing legend has ever had to endure in the history of the sport. Yet, Messi remains the single most powerful name in Argentine soccer. His is the voice that, in any context, even completely outside the national team, carries the immense weight of 39 years of absolute sporting greatness, a level of dominance unmatched by any player in the history of the world's most popular sport. And Messi utilized that powerful voice to say exactly what he thinks about this harsh sanction. He made it clear, banning world-class players from competing in the Champions League over a minor gesture like that is a massive overreach and an absolute utter disgrace. What has been happening to Argentine soccer since the tournament is a clear campaign of persecution, and the people who claim to Argentine soccer protect the integrity of the sport are the very same ones who spent weeks instructing referees to actively favor Argentina. Now, they are punishing Argentine players for a gesture that in any other situation would never have triggered consequences of this scale. Those words from Messi carry the immense weight of someone pointing out the most specific and verifiable contradiction in this entire mess. If the governing body's punishing them for the Falklands banner, are the exact same ones. Referee Vinicic accused of pressuring officials in the locker rooms to favor Argentina, the punishment completely loses the moral authority it needs to be seen as a fair, objective application of the rules. Instead, it becomes exactly what Messi called it, a targeted campaign of persecution by a governing body that can no longer use Argentina as their pet project. Now, with the whole system exposed to the world, they need to distance themselves from these players with the same urgency they once had to protect them. The sight of these four Argentine stars banned from the Champions League in the very same week that massive legal proceedings against the corrupt system that allegedly favored them are actively moving forward in courts across multiple countries, is the most ironically perfect snapshot this 2026 World Cup scandal has produced since these massive institutional consequences began. The very players that the system benefited are now being punished by that same machine with a harshness that was never used when the favors were going in the direction the bureaucrats wanted. And the English clubs that are losing their Argentine stars for the entire Champions League campaign will feel it deeply in their standings, in their match results, and in their ultimate dreams of lifting the trophy, the most concrete and visible fallout of the 2026 World Cup scandal. This Champions League is defined by that tournament, not just in the confessions of referees and the files of the ethics committee, but in the sudden loss of top players from four major English teams, in the painful results that will surely follow, and in the relentless season-long debates over whether these heavy bans were actually fair, justified, or balanced, and handed down with the same level of consistency that these governing bodies should have shown during the tournament itself. For those of you who have spent years watching this sport from the stands, who come here every single week because you know this is where we say what the mainstream media, with all their corporate ties, would never dare to whisper, who have followed the entire story of the tournament right here, the most explosive in soccer history, and are now watching the shockwaves hit club football and the institutional investigations that are slowly tearing it apart, who, when we warned that the fallout would stretch far beyond the World Cup and deeply disrupt club level, agreed that this analysis was absolutely spot on. You were right. You were right all along, without exception. And today, with four Argentine stars barred from the Champions League over the Falklands banner, and Messi calling the ban an absolute outrage and a shameful persecution, reality hits with the kind of force that only the beautiful game can deliver in its most messy, chaotic moments. 3 final points to close. First, the ban handed down by FIFA and UEFA on those four Argentine players is technically correct under the written rules. The Falklands banner is an explicit political statement at a sporting event. The rules of both organizations forbid it with the exact same clarity and force that they ban any political message at their tournaments, regardless of the country or the historical context involved. But being technically right on paper does not grant the moral authority required when the very bodies enforcing it are the ones referee confessions have linked to a system of bias that spent weeks helping the exact players they are punishing now. That specific contradiction is what Messi pointed out so accurately. It is a hypocrisy these organizations cannot explain away with standard statements about their independent and objective disciplinary process. Second, the sporting fallout of these bans on Chelsea, Liverpool, Aston Villa, and Tottenham is easily the most severe and devastating blow that a single wave of punishments has ever dealt to a group of clubs from any country in Champions League history. 4 different clubs from the exact same domestic league crippled by the... It is the exact same punishment for the exact same incident. It will warp the tournament competitive balance in a way organizers cannot ignore, especially when the heavy absence of Enzo, of Mac Allister, and of Debu, and of Romero starts yielding scorelines that would have gone the other way if they were available. Third, Messi's response to the suspension carries the raw weight of someone pointing out the absolute most specific contradiction in this entire situation, the most verifiable, irrefutable part of it all. The very people who rushed to ban them over that Malvinas banner are the same ones who instructed the referees. The bureaucrats throwing the rulebook at the players for a simple political gesture are the same ones who spent weeks looking the other way when those exact rules demanded they take action. And that hypocrisy Messi exposed with the raw clarity that 39 years of absolute dominance at the top of world football entitle him to have is the single most devastating argument against the shaky moral authority of this harshest suspension international football has ever slammed on Argentine players in the history of relations between FIFA, UEFA, and that country's game. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Is this FIFA and UEFA ban on the 4 Argentines actually fair, Or is Messi right to call it a shameful persecution? Can Chelsea, Liverpool, Aston Villa, and Tottenham survive the Champions League without their key Argentine stars for the whole season? And is there any credibility left for organizations that referee Vinicius linked directly to World Cup officiating instructions? I want to read your thoughts. We build this community together, believing football deserves honest, unfiltered, raw analysis. If you are still here, you know exactly what real, pitch-level perspective is all about. The place where we say what mainstream outlets, bound by corporate money, never dare to speak aloud. We do not just applaud bans here without questioning the moral standing of the people enforcing them, and we do not ignore statements, especially when the logic behind them is the most specific, irrefutable truth in modern football. And we certainly do not overlook institutional hypocrisy, especially when it is the very same corruption we have documented for months. Just raw football, honest and unfiltered. If this video matters to you, share it right now without a second thought. With that Chelsea supporter watching Enzo Fernández get blacklisted from the Champions League for the entire season, struggling to figure out if their squad can survive Europe's biggest tournament without the most expensive midfielder in football history. Share it with that Argentine watching 4 of their most vital players get banned with lightning speed by the very same organizations whose cozy complicity with the system that favored them during the World Cup is now being actively investigated by courts across several European nations. Share it with any football fan across the globe who needs to weigh all the facts to decide if this Malvinas ban is a legitimate, consistent application of rules that every single nation and player must respect equally, or if it is the exact targeted persecution Messi described with the authority his 39 years of greatness give him. Hit the like button if you think Messi is right, and that this suspension is wildly unfair given what these same organizations got away with during the World Cup. Subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications, because the massive fallout of these Champions League bans, the legal battles launched by the clubs, and the evolving case against Infantino will keep bringing you analysis you won't find anywhere else, only here, right here, completely unfiltered, uncompromising, and totally unafraid to say what everyone else is trying to hide. FIFA and UEFA handed down bans with a speed they never showed when it actually mattered. Messi spoke up with the authority his 39 years of greatness give him. And now, 4 top English clubs head into the most crucial Champions League campaign in recent years with their Argentine superstars stuck in the stands over a banner that the very system that favored them during the tournament now uses to punish them. The 2026 World Cup scandal is still triggering fallout, and it will keep unraveling